Welcome back, everyone. I hope you've had a chance to grab some lunch and refuel. And I hope that your morning breakouts were stimulating. I know the one I was in, Housing as a Human Right, was most assuredly. I do have a favorite quote already that I wanted to share with all of you, which is, "Dear landlords, managing people's oppression is not a real job." Big fan of that one. So, what we have lined up for us now will go as follows. We're about to take in a short documentary produced by Marley Kogan, directed by Isabel Evans, executive produced by Tyler G. Hall and Justine Simmons, and edited by Diane Tsai, entitled Renters Revolt. I would also like to shout out the key focus of this film as far as personnel. That would be the Casey Tenants Union and Tara Raghuveer, as well as candidate Janae Manley. Those names will be entrenched after this film, I promise you that. We will then welcome up our panelists immediately to follow. This discussion featuring Trevor Smith, co-founder and executive director of Bliss Collective, and Marisol Bayo, executive director of the Housing Narrative Lab, will be moderated by Myra Jones-Taylor, who's the senior VP of Impact and External Affairs here at Urban. We will be getting into narrative change and power building and how that advances our work in housing justice. Without further ado, hope you enjoy.
My friends, neighbors, comrades, and fellow tenants, we envision a Kansas City where everyone has safe, accessible, truly and permanently affordable homes. At KC Tenants, we are here to get shit done.
Their tactics are effective, but they are bullies. They will make the most noise and show up on your lawn and demand things until they get them. And it's working.
You've got my right hand.
I was born and raised in the Northland of Kansas City. My mom was a single mom. We lived in a tent for a little while. We lived in friends' basements. At 20, I found out I was pregnant with twins. Five weeks after they were born, I went back to work, donating plasma, working at Applebee's, piecemealing life together. Got my Section 8, and then immediately it was like taken away because they claimed I was working 2 jobs when I wasn't. I moved back in with my ex, and I knew that I was getting myself into an abusive situation. I was like, okay, this is impossible. And that's when I found KC Tenants. Hi. Hi. Hi, Avery. You're freezing? Tara was like one of the first people to say, are you gonna take your power back? Here are the ways that I can support you to do it.
Like, you've got a crew that wants to follow your leadership. So you gotta do what you gotta do. I don't know if it's like listening to some hype music. I don't know if it's like...
When we first started organizing, I was hearing a lot of stories of horrible conditions. I had gained access to 20 years of eviction data in urban Kansas City. And we were finding that several dozen tenants were being evicted every business day.
I have mold in my bathroom.
My air conditioning went out about 4 weeks ago.
Part of my ceiling collapsed in my front room.
I'm being evicted. I have court on December 21st.
There's lead paint. I just don't know what to do next. I have to find somewhere else to live.
The people who are displaced here, the people who are exploited, don't have other places to go. In addition to housing, the people of Kansas City
We want to make sure that every tenant in this town is part of a union.
Hey. How you doing? We talk a lot about tenants as a political class of people who identify with their tenancy. They're poor and working class tenants, and that's actually not something to be ashamed of. It's something to find strength in.
So Emerson Manor is another property on the east side, and it is also owned by the same landlords who own this building. We did a canvass there a few weeks ago. Michael, what were the conditions like there?
It's a real shithole.
Yeah? How so?
Stove. $500 with no stove. That's
There was feces on the floor in the laundry room.
How many people in that apartment building willing to come forward? If 5 people willing to come forward,
That's enough.
that's enough.
That's enough.
Of course, there are going to be some housing providers who do not maintain their property according to codes. There's always going to be a bad apple. Like Tara and her team have been called a profiteer, a gentrifier. We've been called every name you can think of. It's been set up as an us versus them, with us being the villains.
KC Tenants, first of all, has not taken a formal position on all landlords. We organize against landlords who are bad to our people. And the profiteers are not these nice moms and pops. The profiteers are corporate profiteers who have engineered the market in their favor. My enemies will love to see how messy my desk is. This bull didn't really have a lot of meaning 4 years ago, but we have given it its meaning. You mess with the bull, you get the horns.
Tenants organized a union at Gabriel Tower after their air conditioning went out this summer.
They took a list of demands to the property manager and to the property's corporate representative.
We're not going to quit doing these protests or whatever until things start to change around here.
My job as Janae's organizer is to hear her vision for herself, because the world needs her to be audacious as hell and ambitious as hell.
Tara would call me and be like, hey, I need you to give a testimony. Can you do that? Or here's the thing that's happening at City Hall. She's committed to people who are impacted making the decisions around our lives. But then when COVID happened, we shut down.
Breaking news, stay at home. That is the order tonight from 4 state governors.
It's now classified as a public health emergency.
Housing advocates warn we could be headed toward a massive wave of homelessness.
Some of the people that we organized were some of the most vulnerable people in the country during those early months of the pandemic.
Many Americans don't have stable housing.
Now the federal moratorium on evictions is going to expire at the end of this month.
My abuser was still living with me. I saw unemployment numbers rising, domestic violence numbers rising at the same rate. And I was like, oh, it's gonna get really bad.
She was working at a gas station and she was working overnights. So she was sleeping like 30 minutes in a 24-hour period for weeks on end. And she called me bawling. And she said, I don't know how the world can let this happen.
I am taking a minute to call on Governor Parson to let him know last night I worked from 10 p.m. till 7 this morning. I can't cut back on my hours at work to be able to be a mom and a teacher to my kids without a rent suspension.
At that time, the consequences of an eviction were equivalent for some to a death sentence. So we were left with no other choice but to shut evictions down.
Displayed messages on overpasses.
We want to cancel rent and mortgages.
They chained themselves to the doors of the Jackson County Courthouse in protest of evictions.
They would chain themselves to the doors and posted a big thing saying, you have blood on your hands, to a judge who was merely doing his job because he wouldn't stop evictions like they demanded. What kind of sense is that? That feels violent to me. And so they used the eviction moratorium to chip away at our private property rights.
Your investment is not worth more than a person's life. And their life right now depends on the place where they live. And they can't afford to pay you rent because they've lost their job during a global pandemic. But you've got federal aid to help you out, buddy. You're gonna be okay. We shut down 90% of the evictions that were scheduled.
Today, a new order. 0 evictions till January 24th.
One of the beautiful things about COVID, as a real estate agent, I saw this too for my clients that are selling houses, the prices went up.
Rents have soared in the last couple of years since the pandemic. They're rising at rates higher than we've seen in 40 years. Before we started organizing, the conversation around the city hall was about potholes and trash. Truly.
The fact that they're littering, the trash, the litter that is left, spray painting graffiti.
These forums were like buttoned up, purple clutching events. And out the gate, we said, we're gonna bring our crisis to the people who have either created it or they have the power to do something about it. And we're gonna show up to the forums wearing our yellow t-shirts and disrupt.
Tonight, the ongoing debate over tenant rights in Kansas City, Missouri is back before the city council.
I've known my rights were being violated. I've proven my rights have been violated. All I can do as a single mother is continue to drown in a system that won't fight for me or my children.
Voters approved a $50 million bond that will be used to help build what is called deeply affordable units.
48% of us are renters. Almost half the city is a tenant. We have a stake in this place, too.
Passed an ordinance that gives free legal representation to tenants facing eviction.
They're doing everything they can to turn this place into a playground for the wealthy, for the muckety-mucks, and I ain't a muckety-muck.
Nothing in this Bill of Rights should scare a landlord who's already doing right by their tenant.
A Bill of Rights for all renters.
Bernie Sanders tweeted, "Congratulations to the advocacy work done by KC Tenants to help pass a tenants' Bill of Rights."
It's a 3-bedroom, 1 bath in Blue Hills, and it's had some paint, floors, they had gross carpet. KC Tenants, they're strong and they're getting what they ask for. And what they're asking for next is mandatory acceptance of vouchers and rent control. All these things start to make this asset over here very unattractive. I am as liberal as the day is long, blue through and through. And even I'm like, this is gonna wreck the rental landscape of the city.
We demand social housing, permanently off the private market, and truly affordable forever.
Who in the world that's in their right mind would want the government to be a landlord and to own real estate? It's never worked. We had projects here that did not survive.
Yeah, the government programs don't work as they should today. That is because they've been defunded, privatized. The answer is investing in those public programs and guaranteeing that investment over the long haul.
Why does it have to be a policy solution? Why can't the natural market do what it does? What the normal person would do, if I lost a job, I'd go, hey, which one of my relatives can I go double up and live in there? Mom, can I come to your basement?
It is not a good thing for our only option to be like finding a roommate or a partner or parents. I moved my abuser back in because I knew that the only way that I wouldn't be in crisis on the rent was to have somebody stay with me. We can continue to look at poor and working class people and assume that they've done something wrong. It's not their fault. How you doing? Good. So what we know is that like we can pass policy all day. As people in our community like are living that policy, we find kinks in those policies. What's up? Take a break. I can't take a break. I am getting signatures. I have already told you this.
In order to pass policy in Kansas City, we have to count to 7. So there are 13 people on our city council, including our mayor. To pass anything, we have to have 7 votes. Our lives could be a lot easier in passing policy if we had more champions on city council.
So my name's Janae Manley, and I'm running for City Council, 2nd District at large. I was wondering if you'd sign my petition so I can get on the ballot.
There you go. There you go. Good job.
I was like watching city council meetings like in the middle of the night because I was hungry to learn what decisions were being made about my life and my neighbors' lives.
Hey y'all, my name is Janae Manley. I am running for the 2nd District at large, baby! For 3 years, we have been building power in Kansas City. In 2015 and 2016, I didn't believe this was possible. I sat in my room and I cried for my kids' future. If it's not working for us, we have every right to say, this doesn't work, let's change it. Let's evaluate it and build something better.
We gathered 948 signatures to get us on the ballot. So I'm running for 2nd District at large today. We're gonna fill out some paperwork and get on the ballot. I have walked into this building, City Hall, hundreds of times over the last 3 years. I sat in these rooms as politicians removed the protection that would protect a single black mom like me. That was the day that I learned a champion won't save us. We are who we need.
Others organize around ideology. We organize around mutual interests. KC Tenants has people who voted for Trump. We have anarchists, black tenants, white tenants, elders. We've got young kids.
In the at-large races, where the votes come from all over the city, 2nd District at-large race, Lindsay French facing Janae Manley.
The biggest difference between me and my opponent is that I'm willing to listen to all voices and bring all voices to the table, not just a narrow-minded few.
We are all impacted by poverty in the city, and I want to make sure that poor and working class people have a voice to help co-govern this.
Fox 4 is your local election headquarters, and by tomorrow night, we're going to know who the new city council members will be for Kansas City, Missouri.
Mayor Lucas had predicted that this would be the most progressive city council in Kansas City's history.
Thousands of people in our city went to the polls today, and they voted with the tenant union.
Yeah! Yeah! Yeah!
That is so revolutionary. Do you feel that? Regardless of the results I'm about to read, we crushed. We all know that. It is the single proudest accomplishment of my life that Janae is my leader, and I am her organizer, and she's doing exactly what the hell she was meant to do.
That's right, baby.
In the 2nd District at large, Janae lost to Lindsay French. She picked up 48.44% of the vote, 19,633 of our neighbors. Let me say that again. 19,633
I'm gonna be real with y'all. I'm mad as hell that I lost my election. I'm mad as hell. But I did not run for city council in order to win a seat. I ran for city council to show poor and working class people that we can actually run for city council. I am mad as hell that I lost my election, but I am mad as hell and ready to organize. Are you?
The closest race of the night was in the 2nd District. Manley was part of a new movement spearheaded by the political arm of KC Tenants.
4 of the 6 endorsed candidates came out on top. The populist political organization was formed only 4 years ago.
This is a defining moment for them.
your hand and we'll put it down in some notes. You'll get an extra piece of paper to take with you.
Kansas City is just like every place, like Cleveland or Omaha, in that everything that we do here might be done somewhere else.
I am grateful for y'all, and I'm ready to feel some power.
Power?
We can feel power. Yes, we got it. Yes. We got
Hello. That is a hard act to follow. I don't know about you. I feel like I want to, are you fired up? But I don't know if that's the right setting for this. But I could ask it anyway. Okay, you can get a hell yeah. It's great to see everyone here. I'm Myra Jones-Taylor, and I am the Senior Vice President of Impact and External Affairs at Urban. And I am very excited for this conversation today, and it is my pleasure to welcome our panelists, as well as everybody here in the audience in the room, and folks who are visiting with us on Zoom or on screen. So this is a panel about advancing housing justice using narrative change, and we have two incredible leaders here who are here to talk about that and how you all do it. So please, if you could just introduce yourselves and your organization.
Sure. Thank you so much, Myra, and Urban Institute and everyone. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. My name is Marisol Bello, she, her, ella pronouns, and I am the Executive Director of the Housing Narrative Lab. And the Housing Narrative Lab is a national narrative research organization and communications hub. And we are focused on shifting how the public is thinking about housing insecurity and homelessness so we can build solutions to so many of the housing and homelessness challenges that we face.
And also, great to be here. My name is Trevor Smith, pronouns he, him, co-founder of the Bliss Collective. Bliss stands for Black Liberation, Indigenous Sovereignty. Our mission is to spark radical collaboration and narrative alignment between and within Black, Indigenous, and transformative social movements. Co-founded it in 2022 with my colleague, friend Savannah Romero, who's Eastern Shoshone.
So thank you for that. So we are here today. This is a two-day gathering to talk about housing justice. And we're here to talk about narrative change. And I would just love if you all, I'll start with you, Trevor, and then Marisol. Just what is narrative change and how do you define it?
Yeah, great question. And the video was a great setup for this. We define narrative change as an intentional effort to tell stories that shift values and how people make meaning of information. And a key effort of any change process is power. And so we define narrative power as the ability to tell stories that shift mental models, cultural mindsets, and ultimately culture. And there are a couple ways in which you can go about building this narrative power, and I think one of which, the one that we focus on, is movement building and mass movement building.
Thanks. Super, 100% to everything that Trevor said, and I would add that narrative really is that collection of stories that shape how we think, how we feel, and how we act. And we are all influenced by narratives. And, I want to point you to a few narratives that we're all really familiar with, right? The Founding Fathers. They are, in this country, the exemplars of liberty, freedom, and how this country thinks of itself, right? But we know that so many of them were enslavers. Think about that for a second, about that enduring narrative. And to Trevor's point about narrative being power, like if you have the power, you get to shape a narrative. And so narrative at the end of the day is both about how we are thinking about the world, but through that essence, we can build power. And right now, that's part of the work that we have to do is shifting a lot of that power. And, there's a feminist activist in South Africa Nefumi Mtetswa, who talks about narratives as an invisible power that shapes and defines how we think of what is right and what is wrong. So it's pretty essential to all of our work.
That's so great. Thank you for that. So what are some of the key narratives that you're trying to change or dispel, and why are you targeting those specifically? I'll start with you, Marcel.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the Housing Narrative Lab, we're working on a few things. One is, like, full stop, housing is a human right. Housing is a basic need that we need public investment for. The thing is that depending on who I'm talking to and depending on the audiences and how they are coming into the conversation, I may not actually use the words, housing is a human right. I may talk to people and say, everyone needs a safe place to sleep. I may talk about how all of us need housing that we can afford in order to thrive. I may say housed communities are thriving communities. All of those are pointing to an essential piece around housing as a human right and housing as a basic need that needs public investment. Sort of the flip side of that is really dismantling and disrupting the housing as a commodity frame, which is so harmful to where so many of our people are. And we saw a lot of that work that was being done in Kansas City that really points to that in action.
Yeah, and then I think the way that we talk about it, we're up against big systems. We're up against colonialism and the legacy of colonialism, and we're up against the legacy of slavery, which is manifested in the system of racial capitalism. We're up against what it means to be an American. We're up against the core story of the quote-unquote American dream, the lies and myths that are told to our children that Christopher Columbus found this land when there were folks already here. And then what we try to put out into the world is very simple: stolen land, stolen labor, and the inequities that we see today are a result of that stolen land and the wealth that has been built on the backs of enslaved Africans. So that's kind of how we set our frame. And then what we're calling for is what we call a New Deal. Knowing that the original New Deal left out Black folks, left out other people of color. We're calling for reparations and reparative policies for Black and Indigenous people, and economic and social policies designed to uplift all people, particularly working class people of color. And we can hold both things. We can hold reparations and reparative policies while also call for universal policies that uplift all people, particularly working class people.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. So you alluded to this a little bit, Maricel, that it sounds like you speak to many different audiences, but I would love to hear you talk about the primary audiences of your narrative change.
Absolutely. For us, again, at the lab, because we are so focused on housing as foundational to all of our lives and that we need it in order to thrive, we have three primary audiences. The first is the housing sector, and the housing sector, the housing field writ large. So everyone from organizers, housing advocates, tenants' rights organizations, all the way through those that are providing housing, nonprofit developers, landlords, the landlords that we want and need to take more vouchers, for example, because we know that that's a really big problem. And so really looking at the housing sector is the first. The second is mass communicators, journalists, TikTok influencers, artists, documentarians, the people that are doing the work to help shape the public mindsets that Trevor just talked about and shape the public discussions. So we all know that public discussions are happening on TikTok, they're happening on Instagram, they happen on Twitter. And so really the folks there. And then the third group is a group that you saw represented in Kansas City, but that frankly needs to be represented across the board, which is the group of people that are impacted by and have had personal connection with both housing insecurity and homelessness. And I say really quickly, I want to point to some national research that we did with the National Law Center, the National Homelessness Law Center. My colleague Eric Tars is here right now, but we did some research with them that found that 66% of respondents nationwide have had an impact, have had a personal connection to housing insecurity. That is, either they or someone that they know. 3 out of 5 people have had a personal connection to homelessness, either they or someone they know. Y'all, that's a lot of people. And we need to bring, those are the people we need to continue to bring in, both persuade them to join us, and for those that are already with us, mobilize them, energize them to action. So for us, they are a very key audience as well.
Thank you. Trevor, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, we say it in our mission statement. We're oriented toward today's most transformative social movements, particularly Black and Indigenous social movements. And so we see ourselves as movement connectors, infrastructure builders, creating the space, creating the capacity for the folks who are on the ground across the country to make these movements more welcoming, to build bigger political bases. And so, yeah, we see ourselves as infrastructure, creating the capacity for activists, researchers, organizers, writers, cultural workers to come together to be in deeper solidarity in what we say radical collaboration.
Thank you. I'm going to, oh, please.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the things that, another point that I want to make is we're interviewing activists right now across the country, particularly Black and Indigenous activists. And there are some like key barriers to folks entering movements and participating in collective action. But I think one of the biggest things is a lack of hope. And so there, in the reparations conversation, there's what we call the hope gap. So for Black folks, the percentage of support for reparations across the nation is in the high 70s, low 80 percentile. But belief that it'll happen in this lifetime is less than 10%. And so we call that gap between support and belief the hope gap. And that doesn't just exist across the nation, that exists within our movements. Folks are really feeling like hopelessness, there's a lot of despair. And so why we exist is to create the space for activists to push back against that, to have hope, to see that there are other people across different movements that are with them, that are supporting them. I support land back, and I want my Indigenous colleagues to support reparations for people who look like me.
I love that. I'm gonna stay there with you, Trevor, because I'm curious about the change-making strategies and how you approach this, right? Because that's bold. That's a lot. Both of what you've described is a lot. I'm wondering if you saw any similarities between the methods that we saw in the film up here and what you all have deployed or continue to do, and just your thoughts about what we saw in the documentary.
Definitely. I mean, the organizers in Kansas City are amazing, so inspiring. At Bliss, we do research, coalition building, cultural production, and capacity building. And I think you saw all of that in some way, shape, or form in the film. The activists used research to sharpen their storytelling, to push, to push back against landlords. We saw obviously the organizing, the coalition building, the cultural production. We saw, I mean, obviously the end product was a cultural product that is now being used to have a conversation, to spread a narrative. And then capacity building, we saw folks make space for each other to think about how can we do this work better. And so for our work, like what we do is, I think, exemplified through that film.
Thank you. How about you, Marisol?
Yeah, the film was amazing. And so I'll point to two things and then maybe talk a little bit about how that connects with what we do at the lab. What I thought, there were a couple of things that were powerful in addition to everything that Trevor just mentioned. The first was they organized around shared values. There was a line in there where Janae says, we are bringing people together who are Trump supporters and who are presumably on the progressive side, right? And she specifically mentioned, right, that range. And it's because they brought people in who may come from different political stratospheres on a shared value that they want to be able to have a home and keep it that they could afford, that they should have protections as renters. And that's a shared value. And that's something that's really at the essence of a lot of the work that we are doing is really leaning into community values. Different communities have different values that show up in different ways. As a nation, we have values that show up in different kind of ways. And so part of building narrative is working on like, what are those values that we all share so that we can start to bring people in and move them through that ladder of engagement that clearly you saw was working in Kansas City. And so I thought that was really deeply impactful. The other thing I will say is lived experience. You saw that there. All of their movement was people with lived experience, people who are experiencing this, leading in the solutions. And in their case, they were organizing, going to city council. Janae ran for city council. And it was 48 to 52. That's huge, right? Like how expansive was that and how much work did they do? And what does that say about the work that they did? So at the lab, our work starts with research, but it's based on community values. Right? What is it that we are really moving toward? And then we look at the narrative research. We do that research, then we help people, frankly, implement it. And I say this last piece because I know I'm in a room full of analysts and researchers and my data people, and I love y'all. And we all do like wonderful research, and if we can't implement it and people don't know how to implement it or put it into action, then we have some really nice research on our websites, right? And so a lot of the work then that the lab is doing is really like nuts and bolts of what that research could look like in action.
So I'm going to come back to that because I want to hear all my colleagues in the back, everybody to hear all that. But I'm going to come back to that because that's really important to what we're trying to do here at Urban as well. I'm going to go to you, Trevor. You talked about the cultural product that we have at the end with this film, right? And so I would love if you could talk a little bit about if there are any particular storytelling methods or narrative strategies that you all use that you find to be most effective.
Yeah. So I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this, and Marisol talked a little bit about values and cultural values, and I think one of the cultural values of the United States is anti-Blackness. And so, to me, the way that I talk about reparations is that it's an economic project. I think a lot of folks here probably know about, have seen reparations be framed within the context of the racial wealth gap or the black-white wealth gap. But for me, reparations is not only an economic project, it's a political and cultural project as well. And that cultural piece means that the work of reparations is not done until we uproot anti-Blackness, so that it's an ongoing process until we can measure that does not exist in our society anymore as a cultural value. And the way in which we go about trying to tell those stories, I'm really interested in the power of comedy, and so the power of comedy and the power of poetry. And so over the past couple of years, I've worked with content creators who have taken different takes of talking about and framing reparations, and then we partnered with a group called Swayable to test it and to see how those frames worked. And both the pieces the pieces that took a more comedic take and the pieces that took a poetic take resonated really well with folks. But to be honest, the piece that worked the best was it was a piece that combined storytelling and data and research. And so the piece that worked the best was a piece about the Tulsa, Oklahoma bombing and race massacre. And it moved white people, it moved black people, it moved people across political affiliations. And we hypothesized that the reason why it increased support for reparations is because, one, it combined data and a story, and a story that I think has been whitewashed across society in many ways. And then it framed reparations as something that's not just about slavery, but something about the ongoing harms and some of the more recent harms. So those are the couple ways in which we've been testing like what different types of stories take, but I'm very interested, like my dream is to one day have like a reparations comedy show and try that as an intervention.
That is tough material to make fun, but I'm glad you're on it. I have faith, full faith.
There was a conference American University has on using comedy for social justice.
Yeah, my alma mater.
There you go. I love this. A little shout out to AU. That's great. Marisol, anything you want to add to that?
I would add, so just a little background for a second that will help shape a little context is I come into this work as a journalist. So I was a mainstream journalist for more than 20 years. And for me, the essence of all of this really sits with storytelling. And storytelling is just such a basic human form of connection. It's just how we talk to each other. It's how we tell stories. It's how we make sense of data and research and big, heady concepts that, frankly, many of our brains are just like, for those of us that are not in this room, many people, it makes them uncomfortable, right? They don't want to talk about these things. And so really, whether it's like you're doing TikTok social media, content creation on social media, whether you're doing a documentary, whether you're writing, it's really about the essence and the science of storytelling. Because the reality is that if you can tell a well-told story on whatever platform you are doing, people will read it, look at it, watch it, hear it, whatever that looks like. They'll connect to the sounds, to the data, to the numbers, to the visuals. You can have a really nice camera, but if you don't tell a good story, and nobody watches it, then you've kind of, it's for naught, right? So for me, it's really about, like, how are you telling that story to grab attention so that you can move people to action?
There's something we say similar. I say a lot, and colleagues say a lot at Urban, that we do great research, but if nobody knows it exists, it's all for naught. So how do we make sure that that doesn't happen? Marisol, I want to ask you about some of the key challenges that you faced, and I'll ask you, Trevor, and then I'm going to ask you another follow-up.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so many challenges. So I'm going to point to two narrative challenges, or one narrative challenge, one that is an underlying challenge around this. First is in housing, obviously no surprise to anyone. The big narrative challenges are, one, that housing is a commodity. And if you can pay for it, you can have it. And if you don't, good luck to you, right? The second, kind of connected to that, is that if you don't have it, it's your fault. You've made a bad choice. You've done something wrong. Underneath all of that is the country's narrative around deservedness, race, right? Those are all how we marginalize and treat people that are struggling to get by. So I have the top layer narrative challenges because I'm focused so much on housing and its intersection to how we thrive. But underneath that is a lot of the work that Trevor is pointing to as well. So that's the first thing. And then the second is I want to build on something actually that Trevor mentioned earlier, which is that in our own sector, in homelessness, in the housing sector, where we are seeing our people attacked relentlessly, where we are seeing opposition introduce legislation in states and cities nationwide to arrest, to jail people who have nowhere to go, who only can be outside. There is a lot of pessimism, lack of hope. And that in and of itself is a narrative challenge, and a huge narrative challenge, because guess what? We're not going to organize people if we're telling them to come join us on the Titanic. Like, that's a fact. That's just straight up. No one is going to join us. And so part of there's a little bit also of work that we kind of need to do in ourselves to be able then to help people come into a movement that is joyful and vibrant, that has a vision that all of us have opportunity, that have a vision of success. And what does success mean individually? I don't mean that in a capital way, in a capitalistic way, but that it's opportunity and thriving and health. And that's the vision we need to point people to collectively, that we're working on it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about challenges, Trevor, and also I've heard you speak just recently about people being on the sidelines, the challenge of people on the sidelines, and I'd love it if you could tell us more about what you mean by that, and then both of you, I'll open it to talk about how you change that, how you address that with collective action.
Yeah, so I think Marisol named a lot of the challenges. I think no matter the issue, while the narratives might show up in different flavors, a lot of progressive issues face the same challenges. And I think we saw in the video what I call like the market knows best narrative, where she was just kind of like, well, I don't want you to just let the market, if these kind of things are just natural. These inequities that exist are just natural. And so that's another one that I think I wanted to name. And then specifically in the work that I've been doing on reparations, the diaspora wars. And what I want to say is that the harms of colonialism and slavery are so deep that they have now sought to pit Black people across the diaspora against each other. And instead of Black folk, in large ways, and it is not our fault, instead of us seeing the system of colonialism and slavery and racial capitalism as the enemy, we too get triggered, like zero-sum thinking gets triggered within us, and we see each other as the enemy, or that the pie is not big enough. And so that is also something that we have to heal from, we have to muck through. So I wanted to name that. And then the other thing, honestly, is like our opposition has an easier job than us. They're funded faster than us, and they kind of move a little bit faster than us too. And so we see it all the time, right? Like Chris Rufo says, oh, they're brainwashing white kids to make them hate themselves. And then all of a sudden there's like 45 plus anti-CRT bills across the country. If we want to kind of engage in the cultural wars, you'll have philanthropy kind of be like, well, I don't know, like, how do you measure narratives? How do you measure culture? And what should we really be doing this? Well, let me pay this consultant $300,000 to do a narrative landscape, and then pay another consultant to do the same thing 2 years later. So that is honestly a big challenge that we're up against. Like, our opposition moves, they move on culture much faster than us. And they have an easier job than us. It's much easier to preserve the status quo than it is to disrupt the status quo. And so if there are funders in the room, like, all of these policies would move a lot faster, all of these movements would move a lot faster if we actually put money behind narrative and culture change work, like real money behind narrative and culture change work. And then, I think there's a lot of people that are sitting on the sidelines. I think that often, particularly in philanthropic spaces, when folks hear narrative change, they think about this like persuadable category. I think that we have an overestimation of how many people are in the persuadable category, and an underestimation of how many people who could be in our base, who could be in our choir, who are sitting on the sidelines because they don't have faith in this quote unquote democracy. They don't have hope. They don't believe that reparations and all these other things are possible. And so we have to inspire hope. We have to show them that it is possible, that it's worth joining this movement, that when we engage in collective action, we can build the power needed to disrupt the status quo.
I want to see if you have anything to say, and then I have one final question before we open it up to y'all in the room.
Just on the sidelines question, the sidelines piece, I would say I talked a little bit about those folks that are experiencing housing insecurity and homelessness. I think they're really key. I also think that when we, I don't know if this is so much sidelines, but I think that one of the things that is really important when we think about narrative change is that in order for us to shift how the public thinks, how they're talking about this issue, and then ultimately how they act on this issue, it's not just those 100 of us or so in this room, and those of us in our organizations. It is literally everyone, everywhere, all the time. You do not have enduring narratives. You do not have narrative change if people are not doing this work together. Mm-hmm. And so that's really so critical that it's like foundational for any kind of narrative change, whether you are working on reparations and shifting mindsets around just this enduring legacy that this country has around race, whether you are working on health, whether you're working on housing. We have to have a meta shared narrative that I think becomes really important. And then I just want to add to one other thing that Trevor mentioned around funders, because I think that funding this work is essential. The reality is that all of our policy work, all of our research work, all of our campaign work doesn't go anywhere to the extent that we need it to go if we are not shaping narratives around it that bring more and more people in. And so there is a practical effect of supporting narrative and why it's so important. And so for funders, I would also say that to add to everything that Trevor says, narrative change doesn't happen in short cycles of 2 years, like investing longer cycles. We are trying to undo centuries of mindsets. The groove on how people think in this country is so far and so deep, and we are trying to disrupt, not just disrupt, but dismantle it and start again. Yeah. That doesn't happen in a 2-year cycle. You're not going to see that impact right away. You'll see other kinds of benchmarks that then we all, especially in the narrative space, are really well served to work together to create those benchmarks that then can show the impact over time.
So we are sitting at the Urban Institute, where we are a research institution that we use research and data and evidence to make sure that people and communities have the power and opportunity to thrive, right? So it would be silly of me if I did not ask you the role that you all think data, evidence, technical assistance, all the ways that we think about building solutions and evidence support your work. And I'm particularly interested in something we talk about here when change happens. There's the awareness level, there's the alliance level, and then there's action. We think about these different stages of how change happens and where you would like us as a research institution to plot our research and partner with you all to make sure that the change maker ecosystem has the evidence that we have to bring to solve these challenges. So that was a lot. I'll start with, who wants to go first?
You want to go?
Sure. I mean, for me, it's simple solutions. Right, database solutions. I will tell you, in the research that we have done nationally and locally, people get on the housing front, they get that we are having a problem with housing. They get that there's not enough housing and that people are being pushed into homelessness more and more because of economic factors and all of the systemic factors. They get all of that. Where we are having a really big narrative tension and fight is over solutions. So we get this as a problem, but what are we going to do about it is the challenge right now. And many of the opposition, they're really jumping on a lot of the anger, the blame, the feelings that people have about people that especially are being pushed out and forced onto the street. They're using narrative, but they're using it to push the kind of policies that they want, which is dismantle housing first, which is have people have a drug test or test or get drug treatment even before you have access to a home where you can be healthy and safe. I mean, they're really, that dismantling piece, that's their solution. And their solution is easy because it's visceral. To Trevor's point, it's easy for them to point to kind of the other side. We need to do more research around, so we have the solutions. So for an urban, for all of our policy and research organizations, help us to identify the solutions, because then those of us that are doing the narrative research, we can start to test how the public, A, is feeling about them, and then B, figuring out how to shape narratives around all of these kinds of solutions. I'll add one really quick example. In the narrative research that I just pointed to, guaranteed basic income, now we asked about that and we tested that. It tested at the bottom. But we all know in this room that it can be an effective policy solution. So part of the research that has to be next is how are we helping to shape a narrative that people are seeing that as a viable solution.
So that's great. Trevor.
Yeah, I think I'll answer in kind of three ways. I think first and foremost, urban and other institutions, research institutions, including within academia, need to understand that they play a role in helping to either bolster narratives that are already out there or seek to push back on it. And so just by your research agenda, your policy agenda, what you all are talking about, when you decide to talk about an issue, when you decide not to talk about an issue, all contributes to how folks are making meaning and perceptions across society. So I would say be bold in what you want to research and think about kind of what are the most transformative movements and issues that can actually get us toward closing all of these inequities or addressing all of these inequities. The second that I would say, I think particularly in this context right now, we're talking about housing. Evanston, Illinois was one of the first places to implement a reparations program. Theirs was specifically around the harms of redlining. And so we need more research across the country to show the effects of harm. The effects of harm that have happened, if we're able to quantify it. There was a great Harvard paper, I think in 2022, that quantified the economic loss of the Tulsa Race Massacre. So having these pieces of data, I think, are both helpful for advocates in our storytelling and our organizing, but then also for policymakers as well.
I want to put a plug in for our researchers here at Urban. We have a lot of research and evidence on all of the issues that we've spoken about here. So I hope those narrative change makers in the room will access them. We have time for one question, and your hand is up. So yes, and I'm just going to ask you to wait so we can make sure everybody can hear you. So we have a mic. We have a mic coming to you. I know, but there are people on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Great conversation, really, really good conversation. I would just request possibly in the future that, maybe the young lady who was on the video, or, that we are being intentional as we're talking about doing the work, that we're actually also then doing the work with a person with lived experience who would have been part of the panel as well, so that, then that person is offered to have an equitable seat with offering a solution to the work that they're actually doing. That, I think that's just very intentional and actionable steps that we can be mindful of. And thank you. Michelle Obama says, when they go low, we go high. I think that's also then part of the issue as far as we talk on this progressive level, is that people don't want to get in the funky funk of going just low down with them. Like, we need to go low down with them. And that's what I think is part of the issue on the progressive level is the messaging. Like, the messaging is just, on the other side, they outbeat us by far because we're so busy trying to stay, high and not get in the mucky muck. And we have to get in the mucky muck if we want to stay and keep the messaging on par. I really do feel that way. There was one other thing that I was going to say, but I think that, it starts with Urban Institute. It starts with foundations like you all. While you're doing the research, while you have to be intentional about making sure that we as people with lived experience are not just here periodically to be part of your panel discussion, but you're being intentional as far as creating positions for us within your organizations. That equitable positions, where we're not just a seat at the table, but our voices are valued and heard on an equitable level as yours. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to let that be the final word for this panel because it was so powerful. Please join me in thanking Trevor and Marisol. This is really a rich conversation, and thank you. We're going to sit tight until we're dismissed.
Sorry to hold you all up. Did want to flag that this is what is awaiting you in the hallway. We have the Photo Voice Gallery, which is a research product created by the CAB members who are here in attendance. They will be out there ready, brimming with interest in answering your questions. Please do take advantage of that. You will see all of their names on their name tags to know who the artists and who the researchers of that work are. Thank you all. I want to thank our panelists one more time. And as you head out, please do be careful because the easels are subject to gravity. So just don't touch them. But please do enjoy. Thanks all.
But I don't want to.
No, that was perfect. I also, I want to stress they were absolutely invited, 100%.
Yeah,
The creators and the participants, all of them. And they